joining us together from Orlando, right? You're based in
Yes.
Orlando,
Yeah.
is Kristin Harmel, who is an acclaimed writer and a former reporter of several big magazines, with her book, The Winemaker's Wife, being a #1 international bestseller. And I am referring to The Winemaker's Wife because it was recently published in Romania under the title Ultima Geană de Lumină. So welcome, Kristin.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so honored.
Thank you for agreeing to talk to me and to your Romanian readers today.
Of course.
I read on your website that you were a People magazine reporter covering all sorts of subjects. So how did that influence your writing, if it did? And how did you go from reporting facts to reporting fiction?
Well, that is a great question. So yeah, I started off my career in journalism a long time ago now. I'm about to turn 42, and I actually started writing professionally for magazines when I was 16, believe it or not. And I was writing for People by the time I was 21. So I did that for about 12 years, and it overlapped with the beginning of my novel writing career. It was a lot of fun, and some of the more interesting things I did for People included celebrity interviews with people like, like Matthew McConaughey and Ben Affleck and the cast of Harry Potter and all, some kind of cool things like that.
My eldest daughter would love to hear that, more about that. I'm going to look those articles up.
Oh, thank you. But, I would say that writing for People helped lead me to where I am today in a few ways. One, I think as a journalist, you have to get very comfortable with doing research. And the books I'm writing now are very research driven. They're set primarily during World War II, and they include a lot of facts that, I hope that what you connect with as a reader are the emotions and the storyline and the writing and things like that. But those things are all grounded in a large amount of historical research. And so I think some of that comes from my journalism background, the ability to kind of dig deep and go after primary sources and ask questions. Another thing I think that journalism has helped me with is to write realistic dialogue. I think that's a difficult thing if you're just starting out as a writer. But as a journalist, I think over time you develop a sense that everyone does speak differently, and people's sentence lengths vary, and the way they structure sentences vary, and people's verbal tics vary, and I think that also comes from my journalism background. And finally, at People, although we think of People magazine as a celebrity publication, one of the things I really enjoyed doing there most was the Heroes Among Us stories, which were stories of real people, normal people, not celebrities, who were doing extraordinary things to change the world. And I don't think it occurred to me until a couple of years ago that I think that has a very direct connection to what I'm doing now. I mean, I tend to write about these normal people thrust into extraordinary situations who rise to the challenge and, sacrificing themselves in some cases, try to do the right thing. And I think that comes very directly from my background working on those kind of real life stories at People as well. See, there you go. A very long answer to a short question. Sorry.
I love long answers. So what was your first book and how did you end up publishing it?
Well, you have to promise not to laugh at me, but that was a great segue because I did used to write for People magazine, which of course is primarily a celebrity magazine. And I started off writing much lighter fiction, what we would call chick lit, kind of like a romantic comedies. So my first
The Art of French Kissing.
That was one of them. My very first was even a funnier title. It was called How to Sleep with a Movie Star.
Oh God, I have to look that up.
I promise it's not a real how-to book. I cannot even tell you the number of times I've had to issue that disclaimer. It's not a real how-to book, but it's about a magazine reporter who gets involved in a situation where the whole world thinks she's having an affair with a movie star. And really she's not. Her love life is a total disaster. But a lot of the setting for that book, which takes place, in the magazine world and in New York, was based on my own experience with that. Although my disclaimer that always goes along with the book is I did not sleep with a movie star. So that book came out a long time ago. That came out in 2006. I wrote it in 2003. So what's that, 18 years ago now, that I wrote that book. So I was at a very different place in my own personal journey. I would have been in my early to mid 20s at that point. And, I wasn't married. I didn't have any children yet. I was still kind of trying to figure out my own way through life. So I think that as I've evolved as a person, my writing has evolved too. And I've found my way into writing these kind of deeper, more historical, more fact-driven novels.
The Sweetness of Forgetting was your first novel about World War II, am I right?
It was, yes, very good. Yep.
Why don't you tell us a bit about The Winemaker's Wife? Because the book just came out, it's fresh out of print, and our readers haven't had a chance to read it yet. So why don't you give us a bit of an insight on it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, first of all, just what an honor it is to be published in Romania. I can't even explain to you how incredible it is. I mean, here I am, I'm in my office in Orlando, which I'm sure looks very put together because I have all my books in the background. But if I turned my camera, you would see it's just a complete disaster area. But think about how special that is. I get to write these books in my little home office in the United States. And there you are in Romania, possibly having the experience of reading a book. It's beautiful. And I so appreciate that opportunity. And I'm so grateful to anybody who goes out and picks up this book and reads it there. It's really a great honor for me. And I love that in a way we're kind of connecting, even though there's distance that separates us. But The Winemaker's Wife is set in Champagne, France, which is, especially with travel being a little more limited these days, Champagne's a pretty nice place to virtually travel to in a book, right? And it's about three women from two different time periods, two of them during World War II and one in the present day, who all have a connection to a champagne house called Champagne Chauveau, which is fictional, but is based on some real champagne houses. The two women in the past wind up getting involved with the French resistance during the war. And the woman in the present has a connection to the two women in the past that she doesn't know about yet. She does not know that her background includes something to do with this champagne house. So as the story unfolds, we see all three of them making really difficult decisions that in some cases result in people losing their lives, in some cases result in just enormous personal risk. But it's based very strongly on real events that happened in Champagne during World War II. And one of the things that led me to this story was that I had written a couple novels set in World War II Paris. And I used to live in Paris myself. I have some French family background, which is, kind of what initially drew me to writing about World War II in that country. But as I was writing the Rue Amélie, which was the book that preceded The Winemaker's Wife, which was set in Paris, I started to think, the French resistance was very active all over France. I wonder what other areas of France would be interesting to set a book in. And I had been to Champagne on my honeymoon in 2014. And when I was in Champagne, they talked a lot about World War I and about what had unfolded there during the Great War, during the First World War, because the region had been almost completely destroyed. I mean, absolutely decimated. A lot of the fighting took place right in that region. But during that trip, I didn't hear that much about World War II. And I thought, I wonder what happened there during World War II. Well, what happened there was fascinating. And it turned out that the French resistance was so rooted in Champagne that some of the leaders of the biggest champagne houses were actually running the resistance behind the scenes, which was fascinating to me. So that was a really fascinating thing to dig into. The idea that so much was going on literally beneath the earth under the Nazis' noses. There were French soldiers installed there to look over the champagne production and to requisition champagne for Germany. And the people who were dealing with these French officers and French soldiers were literally the ones running these massive resistance operations, which was so interesting. And one of the other things that appealed to me about setting this book in Champagne is I think that when we think of champagne, the drink, we think of celebration and carefree abandon and the sparkles and the, just champagne's a drink you drink to celebrate, right? But it turned out that this area of France, the area in which champagne is produced, had a very strong tradition of bravery and of loss and of grit and of making these hard decisions. And in fact, in my research, I found a line in one of the books I read about Champagne saying that the earth of Champagne is soaked with more blood than anywhere else on the planet because of all the wars that have taken place there. And I never, thinking about that, thinking about the physical earth and the grapes that spring from it, and to think of all the things that have taken place there just kind of gave me a completely new appreciation for these bubbles we drink in celebration. So again, another long answer to a short question. Sorry.
Do you like wine? What type of wine do you drink?
I love wine. I do love champagne. And perhaps that's one of the downsides of having written a book about champagne is now I've developed a real taste for champagne, and it's not very inexpensive. So I way too much of my book paychecks go to buying bottles of champagne. No, I love champagne, but I really love red wine too. I really like strong, big, bold red wines. And yes, I am a very enthusiastic wine sipper. I love learning about wine. I love tasting wine, and I love pairing wine with food.
You're the mom of a preschooler, so obviously you love wine. So.
Yes,
you're probably homeschooling, or working from home, and homeschooling is never good.
That's exactly it. That, in fact, right now I'm just kind of waiting for him to come in and interrupt us. He's in the other room doing a Lego set.
I actually asked my husband to take my son out because every time I tell him Mommy's got an important call, he comes to me and says hello. So
100%. I was doing an event a couple months ago at the library, a virtual event like this. And it was a lot of times my events are more casual, but this just happened to be a very formal feeling one. It was a, very formal presentation. And yes, he came running, my little boy Noah came running into the room crying, "Mom, I have to poop."
Oh God, this definitely happened to me too. Luckily, he speaks in Romanian, so my fellow colleagues would not understand, but this happened like 3 times.
Yeah, I'm like, well, thank you. Thank you for alerting me. I'm so glad you came in and told me that.
Yeah, so how do you do it? How do you write while still being a mom, stay-at-home mom, so to speak, during this pandemic?
No, it's been a really tough year. I will tell you that. Prior to the pandemic, Noah was in preschool, and that was my work time. I would drop him off at school. I would come home. I would write, and answer emails and do all of the other kind of business stuff that goes along with it. And I would pick him up from school, and then I'd have the rest of the day with him. It was a good balance, and it'll be a good balance again when the world returns to normal. But we've decided to keep him out of school for this whole school year. It's his last year of preschool before he begins primary school, It's been hard. I mean, I'm trying to do school with him, like you said, homeschooling. So we do that every morning. But what it has done to my schedule is that it has really condensed my work time. So I used to have kind of the whole first part of the day to work. Now I wake up at 6 a.m, or a little bit before 6 a.m, and I work from 6 to 9. So I work for 3 hours every morning. And then on the weekends, my husband takes him until 2 o'clock both days. So I get to work Saturday and Sunday from 6 until 2, which, I managed to write a book during the pandemic, which is coming out in the United States this summer.
I actually wanted to ask you.
Oh, good.
These are the conditions that you wrote the Forest
These
of
are
Vanished
the
Stars.
conditions. And not only that, but not only did I write a book this year, but I promoted a book that came out last summer. I've done more than 100 virtual events to promote the book of Lost Names. It was called the Book of Lost Names. It came out last summer in the States. So I've done, I think, oh gosh, it's probably about 120 virtual events now. So I've done that also while juggling the care of a 5-year-old. And last April, so a little over a year ago, with 4 other authors, I started an online web series called Friends and Fiction.
I know.
Oh, great. Well, so we do that every Wednesday night at 7 o'clock Eastern time. It's a live show. I would love for Romanian readers to join in too. We talk about books. We interview other authors. It's called Friends and Fiction, and you can find us on Facebook. But it's not just a matter of showing up every Wednesday night to be on air. There's probably 20 hours per week of prep time that goes into all the behind the scenes stuff. And so I must have been crazy. I don't know what made me think like, oh yeah, I've got plenty of free time. I only have to write a book, promote a book, and launch a television series all at once. So it's been a little bit of a crazy year.
This is fabulous that you promote other writers. It says something about your character. I mean, you don't find other authors as, your competition, your friends, and you write books.
I appreciate you saying that. And, my feeling about that is we're all in this together. And yes, we do compete for sales, but it's not a competition, because if you read a book that I've loved, that I can recommend to you, then you've grown a little bit as a reader also, you know what I mean? And we're kind of on this same journey together. And it's a tough world out there, especially, over this last year when we've all had to promote books in a pandemic. And, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So if we can help each other, I think we all benefit in the end. And it's just the right thing to do. The world's a better place when we're all reaching out our hands and saying, how can I help you? Right. So I think that's important in all walks of life. And it's something I'm not perfect with. And I still sometimes feel, professional jealousy or, things like that. I think that's human. But I think life is all about taking steps toward being a better person all the time. And that's one of the ways I try to be a better person. If that makes sense.
This is why, for example, Ines, she's not totally likable at the beginning, but of course not despicable as well. So did you mean to create Ines or Celine on that matter as an imperfect protagonist?
So that's a great question. So in The Winemaker's Wife, the two women in the past, the two women during World War II are Inez and Celine. Both of them are complicated characters facing difficult times, and both of them make good choices and bad choices. And some of the bad choices come from, for both of them, I think from selfish reasons. This was a really different experience for me. With all of my previous novels, the number one comment I always get back from my editor is you need to rough your characters up. Your characters can't be too perfect. That is always one of my faults as a writer. I write these characters who are just doing good and kind things and always thinking of everyone else, because that's the ideal, right? I mean, we all wish we could be that way, but it's not reality. And so this was the first time that I really wrote a character, particularly Inez, who is difficult to empathize with at the beginning, because when the novel starts out, she's young, she's impetuous, and she's making a lot of selfish decisions. But it was also a really interesting journey for me as a writer, because I had to get inside Inez's head and I had to find a reason to like her. I had to figure out why she was doing these things and why she was making those mistakes. And I really grew to like and sympathize with Inez, because she's, at the beginning of the book, very much a product of her circumstances, and she doesn't know how to break out of her circumstances. And she's trying, but nobody wants to hear that there's more to Inez than they've always thought. Like Inez has been kind of painted as this trophy wife, and she's young and she's beautiful, and she was never expected to chip in or pitch in until now, and until the war is on and life has suddenly changed. So she's trying, but it's hard to break out of that cage where everyone else has kind of put her. And some of her bad decisions stem from that. So I hope that if you finish the book, well, first, I hope that if you read the book, you'll give Inez a little bit of a chance and realize she's a flawed human, right? Like a lot of us are flawed, and particularly, and speaking from my own experience, a lot of us are flawed when we're young, like she's in her her 20s. And I certainly had a lot of personal flaws in my early 20s that have taken me, 20 years to work through. And I'm still a work in progress. But Inez is young. She's in her 20s. She's trying to make the right choices. And I hope that through the journey of the book, you can appreciate her growth, and that you appreciate that at the end she's maybe come to some major personal transformation that puts her where she's meant to be, if that makes sense. I like it. I like Inez. She has some growth, but she's all right.
She's your baby. You're supposed to like her.
One of my babies, exactly. A baby who doesn't run in interrupting Zoom conferences, but yes, one of my babies yet the same.
Most of your lead characters are women. Is it because you're a woman and you find it easy to lend them your voice, or because you want to give women who have lived through difficult times and were often unsung heroes their own voice?
That was very well put. Thank you for that question. I think it's a combination of both. I do feel more comfortable writing from a female viewpoint because I'm a female myself, and I think it's easier to get inside the heads of these characters for that reason. But it is also the fact, like you said, that throughout history there have been so many unsung women who don't have a voice, and who haven't been given a voice. And I think we're at a moment in our modern history where that's starting to change, in politics, in society, and in every form of art. I mean, when you look, for example, at the Oscars now, the movie awards, so many of the films are made by women or about women, and that's changing. That's not how it was 10 years ago. I think it's changing across all spectrums. And I think particularly in regard to World War II, I think that's one of the reasons why there are so many World War II novels now, because for a long time we were telling the stories of what men did in World War II. And that was very important. I mean, my goodness, of course it was important what men were doing in battle and all of those things during World War II. But behind the scenes, there was so much taking place that was led by women. And I think that there are so many books now doing a good job of bringing those stories to the forefront, because I don't think World War II would have turned out the way it did if not for those strong, unheralded women working behind the scenes, doing very important things. So I think it's an honor to kind of to shed light on that part of history that perhaps we don't know as well or know as intuitively.
Do you base your story on actual women, or do you make up your characters from scratch?
So that's a great question. I know a lot of writers who base their novels around real people, solidly around real people, where the protagonists are fictionalized versions of real women from history. That's not the way I do it. And one of the reasons is that as a writer, and you know what, maybe it is coming from a journalism background that I spent a long time telling real stories, and I'm like, now it's my turn to make up the facts, right? So the way that I write is to choose real historical circumstances and real historical stories, to spend months researching the facts of those worlds, and to paint a true fact-based world as vividly as I can, but then to set in motion fictional characters based loosely on real historical figures, who have more of the freedom to kind of move about within the novel in ways that'll hopefully hit you in the heart and stick with you. No, so for instance, there was no real Inez, there was no real Celine, but there were women like them. And so I'm telling stories that are very much rooted in fact, but that are not biographical fiction. And I really do applaud the women or the writers who are writing biographical fiction, because I think that that's an incredible skill in and of itself to do honor to real historical figures and to imagine their internal lives that way. But that's just not the way that I write. So, but you can count on, in my novels, a very accurate and very fact-based and very research-heavy historical setting and historical framework for these fictional characters.
Yeah, I've been actually meaning to mention that your books are written in such a manner that we, the readers, are totally immersed in the
Oh,
story, and
thank you.
we believe 100% that those events really happen. So I wanted to ask, how do you do your documenting, your research to make sure your books come across as historically accurate?
Well, one of the things I've realized since writing The Winemaker's Wife is that I've clearly made a mistake not following in the footsteps of that book, because for The Winemaker's Wife, I get to travel to Champagne. I get to visit a ton of champagne houses. I get to talk to the foremost historian of Champagne. I get to
Did you
tour
see how
cellars.
champagne is made?
Yes, that was a huge part of it too. And it's interesting that you ask that, because I was very immersed in seeing how champagne is made today. But there are differences between how it's made today and how it would have been made in the 1940s. And so one of the elements of my research that was particularly interesting was I had to get an old champagne making textbook that was in French. And have portions of it translated. So I speak a little bit of French, but not enough to trust my own translation abilities. So I had to pay to have this obscure textbook from the early 1960s that was intended to teach people how to make champagne. Like at the university level, I had to have that translated. And so I understood the differences between how champagne would have been made in the 1940s versus how it was made now. That is probably boiled down to a grand total of maybe 3 pages interspersed through the entire book, which is just kind of a funny example of how, a month or more of research can be boiled down to something so small. But at the same time, I had to understand that to feel comfortable writing this story. Like I had to understand the world I was writing about. So that was a really interesting part of the research, as was talking to the historian of Champagne and talking to a woman who is the historian for several of the major champagne houses, which if that's not the best job in the world, I don't know what is. I mean, my gosh, just to be able to, right, like to be surrounded by champagne all the time and history, how cool. But what I was thinking though is, gosh, I had this amazing trip to Champagne. I get to taste champagne all over the region. I get to speak with champagne makers all over the region. And did I mention the trip to Champagne, which was amazing?
Yeah.
Why have I not been doing that since then? Like, why was my next book not about like chocolate or, pasta in Italy? Like, what am I doing wrong with my life?
What is your next book about?
So the book that followed The Winemaker's Wife was the Book of Lost Names, which came out this past summer in the United States. And that book was about forgery. Document forgers during World War II. It's about a female document forger who finds her way into the French resistance and ends up saving the lives of hundreds of children. But then the book that she encodes the children's names in goes missing, and she has to find it. And it's that was a really fascinating book to write, because I never knew anything about forgery. And so to kind of deep dive into this research into document forgery was really fascinating for me. And I get to get my hands on some primary documents relating to that, some documents that would have been forged in the 1940s, things like that. So that was so interesting. But documents are not
in France as well.
That was in France as well, but it turns out forged documents are not as delicious as champagne. So, interesting book, interesting research, but my stomach was very upset about that. We should have been doing food and wine again.
Yeah.
And then, and then my book that'll be coming out this summer in the United States is called The Forest of Vanishing Stars. And it's set in World War II Eastern Poland, and it's about Jewish refugees who survived the war by hiding in the woods, and a woman who comes into their lives and kind of changes everything, which was such a fascinating book to research. I know more than I ever could have imagined about how to survive in the woods, how to survive during a winter, how to build a shelter, how to, which bugs you could eat in the forest for nutrition, how to ice fish in the winter. I mean, things that how to kill a man with your bare hands. I mean, things I never imagined I would know.
But you're the mom of a boy, so you definitely need to know which bugs are edible.
Exactly. So this will educate my future parenting decisions. No, please don't eat that bug, but that bug's okay. Yes.
Exactly. So on a lighter note, you lived in Paris for a while, right?
I did, yeah.
So
Yeah,
what is it about French culture or about Paris that you have loved, that you love so much?
well, that's a great question. I lived in Paris in my early 20s, and it was just for a summer. You know, I've returned every year except for this last year. I go back as often as I can. But living there that summer, it was the summer that changed my life. You know, I was writing for People magazine at that time, and I was very much on sort of a professional fast track. I was working 60 to 70 hours a week. I was very work obsessed. I was very driven. And I kind of felt like if I slowed down at all, I'd fall off
The
ladder.
wagon.
Yeah, exactly. But there was something about being in Paris for that summer. And I think it was the French way of life, and just the sort of the French customs and traditions and attitude that taught me I didn't have to do that. That there's nothing wrong with stopping and smelling the roses, so to speak. That it's okay to take a breath and say, yes, there's work, but there's also life, and I appreciate life around me. And I think in taking that breath, I gave myself permission to dream instead of just to keep running forward as quickly as I could. And it was that permission to dream that led me to writing my first novel, because I'd always wanted to be a novelist, but I had never stopped to do it because I was on that fast track. And so I really, I feel that I shifted and changed at my very core that summer in France. And so France is always a part of me. Also, my dad's family background is partially French. And I found out after I lived there that my great grandmother, who had been from Paris and who had met an American soldier during World War I and moved to the United States, thus, beginning my dad's side of the family, she had lived just a few blocks away from where I lived in France. And so there was something really compelling to me to know that these streets I was walking that whole summer, my great grandmother probably walked those same streets 100 years earlier, or less than 100 years earlier, 80 years earlier at that point, or maybe 85 years earlier. But just that idea of being connected by a place to a piece of my past, it all just felt so beautiful and inevitable. And over the years, I've become a lot more interested in looking into my own family background. And I think there's a piece of me that keeps again and again telling these stories that connect to my own family past. And that maybe these stories that are a little bit, if you believe in this at all, written into my DNA, or that are a part of my blood that I kind of feel compelled to tell.
So you became a novelist after living a while in France. You wrote some chick lit, and now you're writing more emotional, deeper novels. Which ones are more difficult to write? The chick lits or the present day novels, or the past?
That's a great question. The ones I'm writing now certainly are much more difficult to write for me. The ones I wrote in my early 20s didn't really require that much research. I mean, they did to some extent, but now I do months and months of research. And it just in terms of difficulty, one of the difficult things for me about the novels now is that they're so historically grounded that I doubt myself all the time. I didn't have that feeling of self-doubt as much with my first novels that were rooted in the modern day, and that were basically all fictional. There was nothing historical about them. There was nothing terribly fact-based. I mean, of course there were facts I had to research, but they were minor. In these, there are nights, in the book I just wrote, The Forest of Vanishing Stars, I had literally 3 nights when I couldn't sleep because I was worrying about whether I'd gotten 3 Yiddish sentences in the book correct, because I had used 5 different Yiddish translators and they had given me 5 different translations. Which,
no way.
Well, because largely Yiddish is a slang language, right? And there are different dialects in different parts of the world, and so they'd be written in different ways. But I was paralyzed with doubt about, oh my gosh, which translation do I use and how do I decide? And, what if I get it wrong? And what if that ruins the reading experience for somebody because they think that's not the correct way to say that in Yiddish? So things like that.
Most of us don't speak Yiddish, so don't worry.
Right. And nor do I. But somebody who does speak Yiddish will read that and will think, this writer didn't do her research. I did do my research. I do so much research. And it's that paralyzing fear of getting the tiny details slightly wrong it just tortures me. I mean, that is because I want to get it all right. I want to give you everything that's 100% correct. And I do my best to do that. But I think that's one of the things that makes this phase of my career much more difficult. It requires more research. And then the research sparks a cascade of self-doubt that never leaves me. So
if one of your books were to be made into a movie, which one would you choose?
That's a great question. I would love to see The Winemaker's Wife made into a movie.
And of course, go on set and, drink champagne.
Of course. And drink champagne. Well, I mean, I feel that it would be my responsibility to taste test the champagne for them, just to make sure it's safe and accurate, right? So The Winemaker's Wife, I would love to see made into a movie. And in fact, I've been kind of trying to teach myself how to write screenplays. I've taken a couple of screenwriting classes, and The Winemaker's Wife was the first of my novels that I tried to adapt. So I've actually written a screenplay for The Winemaker's Wife.
Fabulous. Let all the producers come to you.
Yes, exactly. Yes. If there's a producer out there listening to this, you can call me. But I also think the Book of Lost Names, which is the one that came out in the States in 2020. I probably more than any of my other novels, I see that as a film, and there's been a little bit of interest. So fingers crossed, we'll see what happens with that. But I mean, gosh, one of these has to work out. I've had so many books optioned, and we get a little way down the road, and then it's very difficult to get things made in Hollywood, and there are 100 obstacles to every open door, right? So but I'm playing the odds game. I'm on book number 14, and one of them one day has to work
definitely
out.
Make it. Yes. It was lovely speaking to you. I would go on for hours, but we are on a time schedule, so I won't. In the end, I would like to ask you if you can, send a message to your Romanian readers.
But that is a great question. And I've enjoyed talking with you so much. So thank you so much for having me. If I could send a message to my Romanian readers, it would probably be this. First of all, thank you from the bottom of my heart for allowing me to come into your country with my words. I mean, it's an honor, and I never take any of this for granted. So any of you who picks up a book of mine, I look at that as a tremendous gift, because like I said earlier, we're kind of connecting across the miles. And I think that's extraordinary. And I'm deeply grateful for that. And I hope if you take anything away from this book, it's the idea that we all may begin in ordinary circumstances, but we all have it within us to be extraordinary. And that you don't have to have a big platform. You don't have to be a politician. You don't have to be an attorney. You don't have to be in some position of power. You don't have to be wealthy. All you have to do is make decisions in your daily life that make the world a better place. Be good to other people, and try to let your moral compass guide you. And I think that's kind of one of the messages of the novel. And I hope it's something you take away too, because I think it's those little actions, those little decisions, those little moments, those little sparks of kindness and goodness that come together to sort of light this enormous flame that lights the world and that makes the world a better place. So I hope that's something you take away from the books. And thank you for letting me share that with you.
This was a wonderful message. I will definitely not forget it.
Thank you.
And I have so much to take away from today's interview. I will need to re-listen it because it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a great honor. Thank you.
And have a great day together with your son.
Thank you. And you too.
Thank you so
much. Bye.
De ziua noastră, tu primești cadoul. La zilele aniversare Litera ai peste 2500 de titluri cu reduceri de până la 90%, cadou garantat la orice comandă și evenimente de neratat. De 32 de ani aducem cartea în casele românilor. Hai pe litera.ro să-ți alegi ce citești.